So we're ready? This is it? All right, let us talk on the Pasha of the week, focusing on one or two things. This Pasha, we said before that Chumash Dvorim is essentially a recap, repetition of the previous, of the whole Torah. And in Seder was Chanon, and this week we have the Aseres HaDibros. Moshe Rabbeinu describes the entire phenomenon. Hayidin stood under the mountain and they heard Hashem's words, and he repeats the Aseres HaDibros with some differences, was basically the Aseres HaDibros, and he describes the before and the after of this experience. And he says the most important principles of Yiddishkeit. He says to the Yidden, reminds them that you all stood there together and you all saw the entire episode. You saw the godly glory descend on the mountain. You saw the fire, and you saw the smoke. You heard the voice. How Hashem spoke to you, and He said these words. And the Rambam points out that this phenomenon, that all of us as a people saw this together, this was not by the testimony of one trustworthy person or 10 trustworthy people. This is the entire nation. Thus, this imprinted in our national psyche, in our national soul, the truth of this, of God and the truth of godly service. And the Rambam explains that anything that one finds out via some kind of a definitive proof, like miracles, this is a miracle, or he has a testimony of trustworthy people, regardless of what the means by which he is convinced of a certain truth, if he needs to be convinced of it, that already means that there is something missing, because it's not a personal knowledge. But our knowledge of Torah and our knowledge of Hashem is direct and personal. Just as we explain all the time, that when you see a person in his face and you recognize him, it's not because you have some signs that tell you, oh, this must be this person. You know this is the person, because this is him, not because of any indicators. It's a direct knowledge. Our knowledge of Hashem and our relationship to Torah is a direct knowledge. And this, of course, translates in all Jewish souls and in all Galim, because the Galim also get a Jewish soul, which was also present at Har Sinai. There's absolutely no difference in there. Like the Rambam describes, the Rambam writes in a letter to a Bevadi Hager. There was a ger who corresponded with the Rambam. And the Rambam writes to him that we are all B'nai Avram Yitzchak Yanki, the offspring of Avram Yitzchak Yanki, and you are Ben HaKadosh Baruch. Your soul came directly without any intermediary, like the parents are the intermediary for their children to bring the soul to them. Your soul came directly from Hashem, because of your acceptance and when you're connecting with the Mensch. So ultimately there is no difference. But this is what's called an inherent knowledge that comes directly from the soul. And we'll come back to talk about this a little later. I want to see if I can manage. I'm going to speak on two specific points in today's Parsha. The first one is that Moshe Rabbeinu describes the sound and the voice of Matan Torah, of the 10 of the 10 utterances. He says that this was a koil godol, a great voice, v'lo Yosef. Koil godol v'lo Yosef. This lo Yosef needs interpretation. What does the Torah mean by lo Yosef? And there are many midrashim that explain this, the meaning of this lo Yosef. Lo Yosef, the word Lo Yosef can be translated in two ways. Lo Yosef means it was not ingathered, like you gather something in, which means it was not retracted, it was not stopped. It continued on. Lo Yosef. And another interpretation and translation of the word Lo Yosef means that there was no increase. Lo Yosef, there was no increase. What does that mean? So Lo Yosef, in the sense that it was not interrupted, it was not gathered back, implies many things, amongst them that this voice, this Matan Torah that started at the time of Har Sinai, this actually empowered and continued throughout all generations, all the Nevi'im, all the prophets, and all the scholars throughout the ages spoke on the basis and deriving their strength and relating to this voice. Thus, when a Yid sits and learns, we're sitting here and learning, and we are interpreting a piece of Gemara, we are speaking, this is the continuation of that voice that occurred at Har Sinai. In other words, the Rebbe points out, this is actually based on the Sikha of the Rebbe, that one may have thought that Onoichi Hashem Elokecha, these 10 principles, Onoichi Hashem Elokecha, this comes directly from Hashem's voice. But when you talk about other mitzvahs of less, quote unquote, of less significance, of less importance, if that's such thing can be said, they are not coming from that same voice. It says, no, Lo Yosef. This will continue with faith. There's no difference. And this is actually what the Mishnah says, that we are not to judge and weigh the significance of mitzvahs. The most stringent mitzvah and the least significant mitzvah, as what would seem to us, they are of equal importance. Absolutely equal importance. I want to give you an example. You know that if a person transgresses on a lav, on a negative prohibition, a negative mitzvah, so there are different categories, but the least, the simple lav is if a person I want to give an example of in our you're not familiar with this, but the truth is a person has to if a person steals, he has to pay up. But if he doesn't have what to pay up, and he doesn't pay up, then there are instances where he would get malchus. Malchus is the principle, is the basic punishment for a love. There are all kinds of different relations that a person can have that he gets Malchus for. Where do we learn out in the Torah that you get Malchus for a love? What does it say in Torah that you get Malchus for a love? A love means a simple prohibition. It is in the mitzvah of loisachsoim shoir b'disha, which means that if an ox is threshing your corn, threshing your produce, so you're not allowed to muzzle him to prevent him from eating it. So you get malchus for that equally as if you were transgressing on the most severe avera, like having illicit relations. There's no difference. This seems to be a true reality. Or the same thing that you learned, and you're going to learn soon, like if you find a bird sitting on a nest on the eggs, you must not take the eggs while the bird is on top. You have to send it away. If you didn't send the bird away, you get malchus. Unless you can send it away later on. But if the bird dies before, then you couldn't be Mekayim, you couldn't do the Esed, you get malchus. Seems it's a reality in comparison to some other Aveiros. Makes some difference. Because this is all coming from the same source and God's word. So this is the pshat according to Lo Yosef. It did not. There is no limit. It continued on indefinitely throughout the generations. Then there's another, as I said, another interpretation of the word Lo Yosef. Lo Yosef means it did not increase. It didn't. There's no add-on. And the Medrash says, what does it mean? There was no add-on. There was no echo. This sound did not produce an echo. And here is where we see the profound insight that the Rebbe reveals. The Rebbe asks the simple question, what's so significant about the fact that this sound didn't have an echo? On the contrary, it would seem, if it didn't have an echo, that means that it wasn't such a strong sound. Because the bigger the sound, the bigger the echo. If somebody whispers, there's no echo. But the Pasuk says it was Kol Godel. And it describes Lo Yosef. There was no echo. What's so significant? Number one, what's so significant about it? And number two, if the Torah tells us this inyan, this principle, it cannot be that the Torah is simply relating a story that has no further significance for later times, for generations. Has no directive, no teaching on a practical level. It has to have a practical significance. What is in fact the practical significance of this? And the Rebbe explains that we have to understand the principle of an echo. An echo is formed as a natural phenomenon of an echo. An echo is formed as a result of a voice traveling freely through space. It can go indefinitely. Then there is an obstruction, something that interferes and blocks the voice from going further. Then the voice hits this block, hits this wall, and it reverberates and jumps back. That's like a ball. You throw a ball against the wall can fly indefinitely. When it hits an obstruction, it jumps back. And that's what an echo is. Sometimes an echo in an open field, sometimes it sounds like it comes from very, very far out. Because as a matter of fact, till there it was traveling unobstructed. Until it hits some obstruction far out into the field, and it comes from there. This was an echo. And so the Torah says that this voice of Matan Torah had no echo. And what is this? What is the significance of this? The reason, as we said before, that the voice reverberates is because the wall, the stone, whatever physical object it is that obstructs this voice, is not able to absorb the voice. It cannot absorb the voice, therefore the voice reverberates back and it jumps back. The voice of the Aseres HaDibros, Hashem's voice, in uttering the Ten Commandments, had no obstruction. There was nothing that stopped this voice. This means two things. It means nothing could stop it. And it means also that nothing was against it. Nothing was opposite it. There was nothing that could not absorb it. The very stone itself heard and absorbed and understood this voice. This is what the Torah is saying. Kol Godel v'lo Yosef. This is a voice that penetrates all existence. I want to focus in on this principle a little bit as it pertains to the Yid, to us. By Matan Torah, it says that when Eden heard the Aseres HaDibros, so it says, Akol dibur v'dibur porcha nishmosa. For each one of these utterances, Hashem said, their neshamas flew out. The neshamas left the body. And Hashem had to restore the neshamas back into their body. What this is telling us is that if we should try and absorb, take the Torah and hear Hashem's voice with our faculties, with our intellect, and with our emotion, with all our great gifts that Hashem gave the human being, we would not be able to tolerate it. There's no way. This is completely above. These words are completely above our intellect, completely superior to our emotion. And as a matter of fact, our neshamas flew out. There's no way they can be held back. How else? What then absorbed this voice? And what was the effect of this voice? The effect of this voice is directly on the neshama, like we said before. This is not an intellectual experience. As a matter of fact, after the Aseres HaDibros, Moshe Rabbeinu had to go and sit down with the Yidden and tell them everything that they heard, because they could not really relate and take it directly from Hashem's voice. They heard it, but their neshamas heard it. But in order to bring this down, so to speak, to their conscious intellect, that was a complete process thereafter. what does this mean generations later, so to speak? What does this mean for us today? We learn Torah and we try to understand it with our self, with our intellect. And we have to recognize that this principle that we're trying to understand the Torah with our intellect, in essence we are trying to understand something that is God, something that only the neshama can relate to. The human intellect cannot really relate to it. By Matan Torah, the Eden said, we spoke about it before, but now I'm focusing. Matan Torah, the Eden said, Naaseh v'nishma. And we explained in the past, everybody knows what Naaseh v'nishma mean. Right? Naaseh v'nishma. We explained that this Naaseh v'nishma is not merely that Eden were obedient. They say, we'll do whatever you tell us. That is not what this Naaseh v'nishma stands for. And how do we know that? Because Hashem waited until they said Naaseh v'nishma. Before that, He said twice Naaseh. We will do, no nishma. And Hashem said, not good enough, not acceptable. Just to be obedient is not the point. The point is that it has to permeate the human being. So it has to be Naaseh v'nishma. So now the question is, if you cannot approach the Torah with nishma, so what happens after the Naaseh? Okay, so now I do it. So what happens now? How do I come to understand it now? If it's not something that the human being can understand. And this is here the big secret. This is the important secret. That's why actually it says, the Medrash says, that when Eden said Naaseh v'nishma, Hashem said, Mi gilu lebonei rozeh, who revealed to my children this secret? Because this is the secret of Torah. And what is it? That yes, indeed, it is impossible to understand the Torah with your say, to start with. But if you first say Naaseh, if you get into the Torah, you relate personally to the Torah by performing its mitzvahs, by recognizing that this is Hashem's word and it is your word, it relates to your soul, then indeed it is possible to understand. Because the Torah is absorbed by the soul and it elevates the person, it elevates the person's intellect, then it's able really to understand the Torah. If you approach understanding the Torah from a human and a worldly perspective, there's absolutely no way that you can possibly understand it. Approaching, coming, trying to. There's no way you can understand it. This is God's wisdom and this is worldly wisdom. The word that the two different worlds is self-defeating. They're not two different worlds. They're two different realms completely. They don't come together. But if you approach Torah with Naaseh, which means that you relate to Torah as this is my Torah. This is the Torah that Hashem gave me, and I accept it and I absorb it. Then that absorption itself has lo Yosef. There is no echo. It's absorbed. And once it's absorbed, then yes, indeed, you can understand it. All of a sudden, it begins to make sense. This is something which everyone experiences as he learns Torah. Something that at one point before, he couldn't possibly fathom. How can this possibly make sense? How can he possibly understand it? All of a sudden, he doesn't know what he didn't understand. It's too simple. What was it? because it's a different intellect that comes directly from the soul, and it elevates a person. This is the Nasa v'Nishma. This is a secret of Torah. The Torah definitely wants us to understand the Torah, not to be robots and to do just to do what they are told. There was an organization that was created by the Rebbe's initiative to take care of a community, and they are big Chassidim, so everything they were organized, they were responsible to run the community. So everything that they had to do, they would ask the Rebbe, should we do it this way? Should we do it this way? So the Rebbe finally wrote to them, that's not what you were appointed for, that I should run it. You take on the responsibility and you discuss it amongst yourselves, and you find a solution to your problems. A person, a Yid, has to recognize his own responsibility, his own connection to Torah. And he absolutely has to understand what he is doing. Absolutely has to be able to relate to it intellectually and emotionally. But he has to know that in order to accomplish that, there has to be, first and foremost, this connection, this absorption of the Torah, this voice that goes in, that you don't understand, you absorb it. You don't have any questions because it gets absorbed in your soul. This is the Nasa. And then you can reach to the Nishma. And then you become a human being that lives and has a true godly perspective on the world. And he's able to understand everything. And he's able to understand Torah in the real sense of the word. It begins to make sense. Not only begins to make sense, it begins to have significance and meaning. And begin to live with it. The process of learning, the intellectual process of learning is, I learn, and I don't just accept what is being taught. I ask a question. I stop it. That means that I have an echo. I said, wait a minute. What does that mean? It doesn't make sense. Stop. Hold it. I have a question. If we start learning Torah with this echo, it never gets absorbed. It doesn't touch the real intellect of the human being. The real intellect. He tries to understand it from his worldly experience. Just wait a minute, doesn't make sense. Are you saying that I can only work 6 days and the 7th day I have to not do anything? You mean I can't even carry a handkerchief? I can't even switch on the light? I don't understand it. I don't understand. This is the echo. I'm sorry? I'm sorry?
The Shakavatari, the Kushivataris, the questions and answers that go on the Talmud, Mishnah, and our wording, that's not this.
Well, the Shakavatari in the Mishnah, this is after the Nasa. Because over there, the Shakavatari in the Mishnah is never. Doesn't make sense. Just what does it say? What is the exact meaning of this? And what is the halach? How do I interpret these words? Never. Yeah, it seems that the Mishnah says that, but it doesn't make sense. The aim is to know what the Mishnah says. Why? Because first I related to the mission. This is my mission. This is the mission's word. The first step is it's absorbed without an echo. It's the real thing. It's absorbed by my neshama. The Rebbe speaks. That's it. It comes right in. Even the stone understands what the Rebbe says. Now that I have it absorbed, now I want to figure out what did I hear, so that I would know what to make of it, what to do with it. I have this, I would think, a classic illustration. I mentioned it, I think, over here in the past. The Torah says there is a dinim of the shoimri. You know what a shoimri is? A watchman. Somebody who obligates himself to watch somebody's article. And there are 4 different categories of shoimri. It's called shomer chinam, a watchman, voluntary. He doesn't get paid for watching, he just volunteers to do him a favor. And he has certain levels of responsibility. Then there's a shomer socher, one who gets paid for watching, he has a higher level of responsibility. Then there is a soiche, somebody who rents or hires somebody's article. He has another level of responsibility. And then there's a shoyel, a borrower, who has even a further level of responsibility. Basically, there are 4 or 3 levels, because Shema Socher and Socher are considered the same. 3 levels of responsibility. And when you look at it superficially, everything seems to be falling very neatly, so to speak, in categories. Shomer Chinam, somebody who watches for free, he has a lowest level of responsibility. And responsibility ends at the level where, as long as he can ascertain that he watched it appropriately, he wasn't negligent, then whatever happens, he's not responsible. He wasn't negligent, and thieves came in and stole it from his house. He did what he's supposed to do. Hashem Socher, he has a higher level of responsibility, so that if thieves stole it from his house, even if he wasn't negligent, he has to pay for it. But if he was attacked by armed robbers, not by thieves, he was attacked at the danger of his life, then he's absolved, he's not responsible. That's beyond his responsibility. But a shoyel, a borrower, he's borrowing to use my article, and he's not paying me for it, then it's, so to speak, the benefit is all his. His responsibility is beyond it. It's as if his own article. If robbers came to my house and they pointed a gun at me, would I have a loss? Of course I would have a loss. Nobody's going to pay me for it. The borrower is likewise. He comes into that responsibility. He has to pay regardless what happens. Okay? Everything fits in very neatly, right? We can understand it from a worldly perspective. You don't need God to tell us this. It makes sense. But then the Torah comes, says, however, you should know there's another principle involved. What is the other principle? That ba'ol of imoy means that if the owner of the article or the owner of the animal did some service for the borrower at the time when he lent him the article, any service. If the borrower comes into his house and lend me this tool, he says, sure. Can you get me a glass of water at the same time? And he gives him a glass of water. What? Perfectly innocent activity. But because he was at this time at his service, this absolves him from any responsibility. Anything that happens.
It's like a renter.
I don't know. That's what the Torah says. It absolves him from any responsibility for the article. And the Gemara says further that we learn out that this absolution is not only for the shoyer, that he is absolved from most severe accident, but it applies to the shomer socher for his responsibility. And some opinions hold that it absolves the shomer chinam from his responsibility. That the shomer chinam, this free watchman, was negligent in his watching, he doesn't have to pay, because the owner of the article gave him a glass of water, served him, did some service for him. Okay. So now, if one learns Torah, and this is part of what's called mishpotim, part of a rational part of Torah. Mishpot. You know, the Torah, there are three categories: mishpotim, eidos, and chukim. Mishpotim are supposed to be the most rational part of Torah. So if one would learn this mishpotim without the approach of naaseh, without the approach that this is God's word, number one, and then I try to understand what's behind this God's word. No, it's not God's word. This is God is being a very, very good judge and a very good lawmaker, legislator. He's setting up rules that make people that allow people to interact with each other. Then this would not make any sense whatsoever. And we would quickly convene the Senate and the House and our Congress and revise this law. Doesn't make any sense. This is why the Torah says the only way you can understand the Torah and you can rest assured that there are very profound significance and explanations of this most odd of halachas. But you can never reach it. You can never begin to think about it if you don't first absorb it. This is looking at the world from God's perspective, living in God's world. And this is how we receive the Torah. This is important for us here, as I always point out. It's absolutely necessary that we employ and engage and develop our intellectual and emotional capacity. But the only way that can possibly happen is if we allow ourselves to be elevated to a neshama level, to understand that intellect itself is not a world creation, it's not a bodily creation. Intellect is not created by our experience, as some people would venture to say. Intellect is sourced in the soul itself. And the soul hears Hashem's words and absorbs it, and that's when the intellect gets created. And then we're able to understand all kinds of supreme and superior ideas, thoughts. And the most important principle in this is that Yosef, that we don't echo back Hashem's words. This is called God of Logos. There's another portion in today's Seder that gives us a similar, although somewhat different, also insight and directive. Today's Pasha There is also the Pasha, the most famous Pasha, I believe, in the Torah, Pasha Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha. This Pasha, every Yid knows. Every Yid says. We say it 3 times a day, we say it 4 times a day, who knows how many times a day we say it. And this is the first thing we teach our children, with God's help. What does Shema Yisrael stand for? Shema Yisrael in principle says this. This is quite similar to what we discussed now. Shema Yisrael says, Shema means understand, listen. Listen and understand. And who should listen and understand? Yisrael. Who is Yisrael? Yisrael is a Jewish people who have this godly gift of a soul, who have this godly gift of intellect, and who have this ancestry, who have everything going for them. And they should know that the only way that you can, so to speak, work through your day, work through your life, your day, your week, and your year, is if you recognize the principle of Hashem Echad. Hashem Echad. What does Hashem Echad mean? It says in Shulchan Aruch that Echad means that all space, up and down, and in all 4 directions, is all one. It's all united by Hashem's presence. In this space, there is a whole bunch of stuff. This is like the story of Yoina ben Amitai. Yoina ben Amitai, I don't know how familiar you are. Yoina ben Amitai was a Novi. Was a Novi? A Novi means that he is a supreme tzaddik, not just a tzaddik. A Novi is such a thing that nowadays, in throughout the period of the Golus, doesn't even exist, except in very, very unique cases. Time was a Migdash, there was Nevi. What's a Novi? A Novi is when Hashem speaks to you. Yoina ben Amitai was given a mission by Hashem, a Nevuah, and he ran away from Hashem. He didn't want to say this Nevuah. Now, this was a unique situation. Yoina ben Amitai knew that he cannot run away from Hashem. He was a Novi, he was a tzaddik. But because this was kind of a Mesiras Nefesh on his part. Because he felt that this Nevuah is going to put an accusatory finger on the Yidden, will bring out bad things about the Jewish people. So he didn't want to say this Nevuah. So he ran away. He ran away from that place where he could not do this Nevuah. And the story is, I'm sure you may be familiar to some extent, the story was that he was on this boat, and the sea, and the boat was in danger to be drowned, to be capsized. So he said to the captain, he said, "It's me, throw me into the sea." And he was very willing to go, throw me into the sea. And of course, he was swallowed up by a huge fish, and he survived in the belly of the fish, until finally the fish spit him out, and Yoina did his mission. In other words, the recognition that wherever you go, it's all one. This is Shema Yisrael. There is no multiplicity. There is no up and down and right and left. This Shema Yisrael represents the principle of Mesiras Nefesh. What does Mesiras Nefesh mean? So the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, why did Moshe Rabbeinu tell the Yidden at this time, the senior Mesiras Nefesh, the union of Shema Yisrael? This was the doyer, this was the generation that's going to enter into Eretz Yisrael. Going into Eretz Yisrael means that they get involved in getting involved in all worldly activities. Going to Eretz Yisrael, they're no longer in the desert, no longer under the heavenly clouds and eating the man. They have to get involved in all worldly things. And they will have to be involved in all the mitzvahs. And Moshe Rabbeinu was saying to the Yidden, regardless of your intellect, regardless of the level of your understanding and knowledge, the only way that you can be assured to carry the responsibility that the Torah is putting upon you and doing all the mitzvahs, you will not be able to sustain that through your intellect and through all the emotional and connection. The only way that you can, what is the basis that will allow you to carry this through? It is only if you recognize this principle. This principle that there is only Hashem. If you are going to rely on your intellect, then you're doomed to fail. This is what the Alter Rebbe explains, that the principle of Mesiras Nefesh, this is the basis, this is the basic strength that Eden have in carrying out their duties as Yidden. So this is again the similar union that we discussed before. That we have to understand that what we discussed before, that for the learning Torah, to be able to understand what we're learning and to be able to carry on and do our duties in life, it is all based on the Mesiras Nefesh. Now, this now in the Shema Yisrael, before we were talking about learning Torah, but Shema Yisrael, that applies to every aspect of human activity, which means that for the person to go out and have the strength and have the carry out the responsibility of just establishing his life, going to work, supporting a family, and doing all the things that a person has to do in life. It sounds very simple, of course. Everybody does it. You have to do it. You have to know how to work. You have to make a living, pay your bills, and raise a family. That seems to be very rational and very simple. Moshe Rabbeinu says it does not happen to be that simple. There's all kinds of obstacles, internal and external. I like it, I don't like it. It's not enjoyable. I have obstacles. The only thing that carries us through all these obstacles, that breaks through all barriers, that does not allow for echoes, for pulling back, and that gives us the strength to carry through all our duties, even in Eretz Yisrael, where we have to go under normal circumstances. Eretz Yisrael means normal circumstances. We are living in our own land. We don't have any enemies, so to speak, that are obstructing our lives. We're living in normal time. We're coming into Eretz Yisrael. Even there, you can't carry through your duties if you do not have this principle. Because the principle of our lives is based on Hashem's presence. It is not based on how we understand the world. And therefore, this is where Mesiras Nefesh comes in. The strength for carrying through and doing our thing, whether it is intellectual, emotional, or any other level. The strength of that comes from the soul, from the neshama. It is not a worldly, it's not a human capacity. And we all know that. I mean, I speak to a lot of people. Every one of us knows that just to get yourself out of bed in the morning on time, all rationalization is not going to do it. I better get up. I better do it. It's just not going to happen. What's going to do it? I'm sorry? A principle of Mesiras Nefesh. It's the neshama that says, God is here, and you have to do it because God says you should do it. And there's no escaping. You think you can hide behind the walls, you can do this. There's no escaping. This is the reality of it. It sounds so trivial. It sounds petty. It sounds almost insulting to talk to adult people about getting up in the morning. But, as embarrassingly as it is, this is what a human being is. He is comfortable and he can't disturb discomfort, and that's it. Because we are human beings, we are intellectual, and we are also behemoths. At the same time, we have a behemoth, an animal soul, and we have a human soul. And this is where the battle is between the human soul and the animal soul, the godly soul and the animal soul. And the only means by which we can overcome this battle and overcome this obstacle, Moshe Rabbeinu says, it is by remembering this principle of Shema Yisrael. This is why the Achon have established that the first thing a person has to say when he first wakes up, if he didn't even wake to Wesh Neglavast, as soon as you wake up, remember this one principle. Simoy De'ani. If you think of yourself as being part of the world, it's never going to happen. You can't rationalize enough to tell a person, get out of your comfortable bed. It's just not going to happen. What's going to get him out of there is Hashem's presence. So these are the two things that Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching Eden and explaining to them in preparation for their entry into Eretz Yisrael. And I want to point out, as we already did, this is a primary principle for us here. I always say that here in this yeshiva, we're not children to stay here. I mean, we have 10 years to go ahead. This is something which is supposed to prepare us to go straight into Eretz Yisrael. I mean, into our lives. We're not here to spend time and enjoy ourselves. We're here to use every moment and then cross over the Yarden and go right into building our lives. And we have to know that this is something that's supposed to propel us. So we put a fire under it, propel us right into life. So we have to know that there is no echo Whatever the Shulchan Aruch says, whatever we learn, it becomes ours. We don't have time to play around with it. We can understand it afterwards, absolutely. But we will not be able to understand it unless we first absorb it. And the only way that we can carry through our duties and going and start building our lives, which we have to do immediately almost, is with Shema Yisrael. We know we have Hashem's duty in our directly to us, and this is what we carry through. This is what we do. And with this, the Rebbe will help each one of us to keep, so to speak, our future in front of us, to be encouraged, and be sure, be confident with Neibish's help of success, of getting through this crossing of the Yarden. Like the Rashi explains that when Eden were crossing the Yarden, in the Yarden, as they were crossing, Yeshua told them, remember, you're crossing the Yarden with this intent, with this condition. And if you do not have that intent and condition, the waters of the Yarden are going to come. The Yarden itself is going to flush you out. It's just not going to happen. You can drown right while you're just stepping over. But if you go with the intent, and you have all the strength that you've been given by Moshe, like we discussed, then you'll be enormously successful. There is no limit. You'll be blessed and enormously successful in everything that you do. And we've seen it over here. People come and they learn a half a year, whatever time they have, and they come out. You can recognize them. They have a perspective on life. They have life, and they have a real inspiration to go and build a life. Maybe it should help each one of us, and with this strength that we're getting here, we should break through all the barriers, our own barriers, and also the Tisha B'Av. We should transform the Tisha B'Av with God's help. The Tisha B'Av should no longer be a day of mourning, but it should be a day of rejoicing, as we have promised in Tanakh, and the Rambam describes it. Mitzvah Hashem, we should all see the Geula Shlem. Shalom Aleichem. The members meeting you.
My name is Moshe.
Moshe?
Emmanuel. Moshe Emmanuel.
Emmanuel?
Yes.
You're not a relative of Ron Emmanuel.